Our next speaker is Nancy Peck Young, Ralph's daughter, who actually was born here in Chicago, I understand, and grew up in Urbana-Champaign, and was well acquainted with all aspects of Ralph Peck's life and work and his profession, and traveled to many conferences where he participated, and I'm sure is going to be able to enlighten us with additional information. So Nancy, it's a pleasure.
Ralph Peck is known as a professor, lecturer, author, consultant, friend, and for me, Dad. There are a couple of little-known facts about Dad I would like to mention. At the age of 8, Dad contracted both scarlet fever and diphtheria at the same time. He was quarantined for 6 weeks, and at the end of that time, he also developed a heart murmur. Since sports were out of the question, Dad turned to the piano, an instrument that his dad played well and loved. When Dad went to Rensselaer, his mother wrote a letter to the university asking if Dad could have a piano in the dorm. The answer was yes, but when Dad arrived and started making arrangements, he was informed that there would be no piano in a dorm. Dad, armed with his mother's letter, went to see Director Ricketts, a man much feared by the undergraduates for his decisions. Director Ricketts looked at the letter, stated that the person writing it had no business making that kind of decision, but then said that since Dad had taken the decision in good faith, he would allow it. Dad immediately returned to the dorm, rented a piano, and had a crane lift it through his second-floor dorm window. He said the whole incident brought him quite a bit of notoriety for a freshman. The first piece of furniture my folks bought was a piano. Dad also loved the opera. All during my childhood, I remember hearing the Metropolitan Opera every Saturday afternoon. Dad listened to it as he scrubbed the floors for Mom. As a result of those Saturdays, both my brother and I loved the opera. Dad loved plays and acted in amateur productions all through high school and college. I did not know until I worked on the book with Dad that he was never a full-time professor at the University of Illinois. He started as a 7/8 professor because at the time that was all they could afford. Later he chose to stay at that status because if he were a full professor, they could have asked him to remain on the campus full-time. As his consulting jobs were the backbone of his classes, he needed to be free to accept the jobs he felt appropriate. While we were working on the memoirs together, I came upon an essay in Dad's files that he had totally forgotten about. It was written when he was 18 years old, a freshman at RPI. It laid out his thoughts of what an engineer should do and be. At 18, he knew what he wanted to do and pursued that goal for the rest of his life. Not many people are that clear about their life objectives at that young age. Here are some excerpts from that essay dated February 1931. It is an accepted fact that today we are living in a scientific age. Our present civilization is founded upon the discoveries of pure science, which have been applied to the immediate use of mankind. In the same manner, the rapid advance in the realm of pure science today will soon be interpreted in the relationship of their value to mankind. It is this interpretation, this application of the research of pure science to the benefit of man, which is the function of the engineer. The engineering profession enables a man to satisfy the creative urge, the desire to see something useful where nothing was before, which is a fundamental characteristic in every engineer's personality. Every situation which an engineer has to deal with requires his own particular solution, which calls for real creative thinking. The joy of solving a difficult problem is not in the least of an engineer's rewards. There are, however, certain inborn characteristics which a man must possess in order to succeed in this calling. Perhaps the most important is an interest and curiosity about the working of the natural laws which form the foundation of the profession. These laws underlie every engineering calculation and must not be disregarded. Imagination must also be an attribute of the engineer in order that he may be able to visualize events and conditions before they occur. However, this characteristic should be balanced by qualities of concentration and patience, which permit unemotional and unprejudiced consideration of every situation. In addition to the personal characteristics of the engineer, certain other desirable attributes will be developed in him as a result of his training. His education in mathematics and science will give him the accuracy and precision of thought and confidence in his own judgment and ability to estimate. The power of foresight can only be developed by experience, which his training will provide him. The final quality in the personality of the engineer is leadership, the ability to control men, including oneself. In a period of crisis, the engineer must be able to ignore his emotions so that he may direct his full mental powers to the event at hand. The opportunity of having a part in a movement which seems as destined to be characteristic of an age, the desire to satisfy the creative urge, and the satisfaction of engaging in a profession which is useful to mankind has assured me that I am choosing the right life work. Dad was famous for having his students create a one-page summary about their projects. He felt they did not fully understand the project if it could not be distilled into that one page. This is my one-page summary of Dad's life. Ralph B. Peck's last big project was the Rion Anti-Rion Bridge in Greece. It was one of his many long projects and was completed in 2004. It received the ASCE Opal's Outstanding Projects and Leaders Civil Engineering Achievement Award for 2005. My dad, Alan, and I went to see it upon its completion, one of Dad's last really big trips. Shortly after the end of the project, Dad began to receive calls asking him to work on another large venture. Dad politely answered that he was retired, but the gentleman persisted in calling him, hoping to get him to accept the job. I was with Dad in his office one morning when the phone rang, and it was the same caller with the same request. Dad handed me the phone, and I listened to his plea and asked the caller if he knew Dad was 92 years old. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then the gentleman stammered that he thought Dad was in his 70s and had no idea he was that old, especially since he'd been working recently. He then said that Dad certainly deserved to be retired and hung up. Dad commented that it sounded like an interesting job, but that he preferred to be able to complete his jobs, and this job would last longer than he would. Ralph Peck was the kind of engineer that could pour oil on troubled waters and achieve a compromise that previously had seemed impossible. He could come up with solutions to problems that often before had seemed insolvable. He would take these problems back to the classroom, the location that he always felt was the most important place to be. This was the area where he was able to guide young minds to solve problems using his information and their logic to finish the equation. Dad loved his work. He loved everything about his work. He liked the challenge of the various projects and enjoyed the people he worked with. He liked nothing more than hiking out in some wilderness where there was going to be a bridge, a dam, or a series of dams, and figuring out how and sometimes where these projects would take place. He liked discussing the projects with his colleagues and coming up with solutions that fit the particular problem. But best of all, Dad liked to use these case studies as learning experiences for his students. Dad received many awards in his life, some of them extremely prestigious, such as the Medal of Science. However, his favorite award was the ASCE Opal Award for Outstanding Lifetime Achievement in Education. Above all, Dad wanted to be remembered as an educator. His over 1,000 jobs in 44 states and 28 countries on 5 continents were the basis for the classes he taught at the University of Illinois for 35 years. He was always pleased to be answering questions from students both in and out of the classroom. His volumes of papers were written to continue the understanding of his various projects so others could take his findings and build upon them. He was particularly pleased to have his papers placed at the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute in the Ralph B. Peck Library next to the Carl Terzaghi Library so future generations could see how soil mechanics and foundations were born and grew and would be accessible to all who are interested in them. Dad would be honored to know that this conference was to commemorate his legacy. His educational process has continued in the case histories presented here by many of his students and the students of his students. He would have been pleased. Thank you.